Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, maybe to everyone. I'm Malcolm Knox. I'm the practice lead at Encore Business Solutions. So I look after the new sales team, and I'm very excited to be talking to you today. This is my first webinar at Encore, so let's get going. So I lead a team of very skilled people with first-class business acumen, and they have the fascinating task of trying to connect what Microsoft has to offer with the very measurable problems that you may be having in your organization. As such, we've noticed a shift in the nature of why ERP is being sought after. I could talk for ages about the profile of who and why we talk to people, but there is something else at play right now, and that is, of course, AI. My team's job has become about educating people and organizations as to why they should care about AI. We have a long list of things that Microsoft requires us to tell everyone, but the sad truth is most people don't really know what they're talking about when it comes to AI in the first place. You know, I wonder if anyone's like me and you're kind of sick of looking at your LinkedIn feed with half-educated guesses about how AI is going to revolutionize different industries, be it government, um, manufacturing, education. But unless you really know what you're talking about, it's very hard to actually invest yourself in that conversation. So, and the other interesting thing about it is it seems like if you're on the outside, you've got to make a decision. Are you going to invest your time into looking into what this actually is all about? I mean, if you own your business or you're a major stakeholder in the organization you work for, you probably will. But if not, you might not, but you might still be a leader in the business. And I guess our job today is to really open your eyes a little bit and have a look at, or at least make you feel comfortable at taking the first steps into looking about what AI can perhaps do for you. We saw how digital transformation was a big buzzword over the last 10, 15 years. And, businesses could still function and sales and marketing could still function in organizations, whether or not you officially took part in digital transformation or not. But anyway, I'd like to keep things really, really simple. Here are the four areas that, from my perspective, I think that everybody should think about doing right now when it comes to understanding how did you prepare yourself for success with regards to AI. First thing is start exploring what this revolution is. And the next thing is we have to acquire some understanding. And I use these words carefully: acquire understanding, not just learning, but the difference between going and doing some learning and actually acquiring the understanding. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And data is obviously, it's our currency in all of this. So getting your data right. And then something that nobody really talks about, but often comes up in conversations that I'm having, is get your business strategy right. So I'm going to give you a few pointers there today. So you saw the video earlier, and you saw a glimpse of Copilot. Some of you may have seen it already, and some of you probably, well, almost all of you probably got the free version of Copilot right now. But I want to clear some things up right now. At Encore, we live in Microsoft's AI world, and I'm not going to get too technical, but for Microsoft's world, we talk about Copilot as our window or interface into AI. In other words, Copilot will increasingly become your main portal to work from and will guide your desktop productivity. Some misconceptions are you can't compare basic or free Copilot with Claude, ChatGPT, or Grok, for example, and come to a conclusion about Microsoft's AI offering. In fact, Microsoft has a multi-model approach, allowing you to select which language model you wish to use across various parts of the Microsoft ecosystem. So what you can see here on this slide is that to try and use it the way that Microsoft AI solutions are put into practice will maybe broaden understanding. So everybody would have their own Copilot license. And Copilot is our window into how our data is organized and how agents work. And so some of you may have heard about agents, but agents are essentially things that can perform processes that you don't need a human to do. And agents are owned by a business. So not everybody has their own agent. An agent is owned by the process or the business or the organization, and actually could even be an asset to the organization. And your Copilot would then see agents. Of course, and call upon agents to perform tasks. But thinking, of course, we have to understand that agents need to see all the information that's relevant inside the organization for things to occur. So it's not just Chat GPT or generative AI. Copilot is not just about that. That is, of course, part of AI, and that's what most people are talking about at the moment. Um, but to actually, improve the speed of your commerce, improve the speed of your business, um, you have to understand that the licensing model is that everybody has their own copilot, and then you go ahead and build agents. And AI certainly, people talk about, well, it's going to be, AI is going to replace jobs. That's not necessarily the case, but what I would say is that AI certainly is going to eliminate waste. And more often than not, actually, we hear about how AI is being used to eliminate fraud. That equates to a reduction in waste. Obviously, there'll be a big time savings and a lot of the productivity gains that you can find. That's another way of saying that we're not going to waste time. Yeah, so you can see that processes are a big part of things, but what are we going to do with this free time? So we use Copilot to speed up the way we operate. We have agents that do processes that can speed things up. What are we going to do with this spare time? Well, the one word I want you to remember is judgment. We're going to have much more time to cast our human judgment upon the information that's presented to us in record time. So while even with a basic use of Copilot Premium, you'll instantly find massive productivity gains. Of course, depending on your data being organized, which I'll get to shortly, but that will leave you time to apply more judgment to the information provided to you. So you might run a query about research the history of our sales in a certain geographic area over the last 6 months, highlighting any interesting trends. And the agent might come back and say, here you go, here's a big report. Now, you could have spent time building that report, but now you get time to apply your judgment to it and make decisions on it and ask for things to happen. So I see that we're moving to an age where we get to spend more time judging the information and actually think. That's very exciting to me. So don't forget that AI is not going to replace you. It's going to present things to you for you to apply judgment. Nothing happens without your judgment. So understanding and learning. I've already used some terms, tried to explain some of the terms and of what they mean and provide some context to understanding here. But of course, one thing that you do need to do is get access to the right knowledge and learning. I'll come back to Microsoft Learn in a second, but I'm a big believer in get your hands dirty early. So one thing I think I would ask everybody to do is get Copilot Premium in your hands as quickly as possible. And start playing with it. Of course, some of you may be using AI in your personal lives. I certainly do some cool things with my children. I will use AI to create customized bedtime stories that have their names in it and their favorite things like dinosaurs, and come up with wonderful, innovative stories. And you can write personalized poems for birthday cards. Of course, AI is brilliant for all these things. But get yourself Copilot Premium and see what it does to your workday. And you'll start to learn what you can build. And that will start to unlock the possibilities in your brain as to what you can do. On top of that, I think for those that are inclined in your organization, you do need to get yourself Copilot Studio. And there's nothing better than just playing with these tools. Don't talk about it. Get your hands dirty, get in there and start playing with these tools as soon as you can. And of course, partners like Encore, and you're going to hear from Aaron in a little bit here. Partners like Encore, we are dying to talk to you about what you want to learn and understand. We're dying to share our knowledge with you. So don't be shy in coming forwards and talking to us. Book discussions with my team. We're happy to talk to you about, what could AI do for you? What could you do with Copilot right now? Aaron will talk a little bit about our offering on that in a little bit. But let's come back to the first point here on Microsoft Learn. So this is learn.microsoft.com. All the knowledge and skills and training, certification prep, practice exams, e-learning, everything is at Microsoft Learn for anything Microsoft, but of course also for things like Copilot, agentification, and AI. Microsoft as a vendor has the most sophisticated and largest technology learning platform in the world. And they are a leader in terms of technical skills. So I do encourage everybody to go and sign up for courses and e-learning and badges and everything that you can find on Microsoft Learn. It's all free. Of course, taking an exam, there will be a cost, but you don't need to take the exams. But there's a ton of free, brilliant resources that you can get at Microsoft Learn. Anyone can go there today and sign up and look at some of the courses. Everything's broken down to bite size so you can consume this learning and knowledge very, very quickly and at your own leisure. Please take time to go there. Okay, so moving on, organizing your data into an AI ready finance and operation system, or you will not be AI ready. You need to establish a single source of truth for data, eliminate disconnected systems and silos, and ensure your data is accessible. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to have your agents or Copilot access the data that you need to make decisions with. So let's have a look. Data silos, so having your data in different places is an absolute risk. Anyway, for your business, it means you're disconnected. So it's absolutely critical that before you look at perhaps building an AI strategy or you've imagined how AI can work for your organization, the first thing you need to do is get your finance and operations system AI ready. That means obviously having the one source of truth with your data and start connecting your sales and other operations in the business to that information so that when you run a query, you're getting access to all the information that you need. Often we hear from people who have said, oh, you know, I got Copilot and then I ran query, didn't get much back. Of course, Copilot was not seeing all the data in the business that they would typically want to access. So it is really, really important that before you do anything, and if you're at the stage of changing your ERP, pick an AI ready provider. You know, obviously Microsoft with Business Central, Finance and Supply Chain Management, and CE and everything, and the whole Dynamics platform is an AI ready solution. Of course, we're going to tell you that, but it is a great chance as you migrate to new systems that you're picking something that leaves you AI ready. But you want to make sure that as a manager, as a user, that you're actually running queries on things like Copilot to see all the information that you typically want to see. You're not having to log into multiple places. So moving on, and this is like perhaps one of the juiciest conversations that I certainly get to have, is that it is really important that you're getting your business strategy right. And first of all, I want to talk a bit about vision. The thing about the conversations we're having is that people are saying, "Oh, you know, our business, we think we can speed up this process. We can eliminate a step of approval. We can reduce the amount of reports that we have to build." But I think like the big gains are all about what do you envision for your business? What are the things, the what ifs about your organization? What if you could factor in weather into what's happening in the field with your products and services? What if you could speed up customer satisfaction or delivery by taking wild information out in the environment? Could be, for instance, there was a funeral providers that we were talking to recently, and thinking about the fact that their business might grow on word of mouth. There's weather is a big part of certain types of funerals, and having umbrellas if the weather's bad. How can you create more sophisticated customer experiences by accessing data that allows you to be ahead of the game and actually think about improving service for people? Of course, you'll think about your business, but I do encourage you to make sure that you access people who are visionary in your organization. It is very important. You might not be visionary yourself, but you certainly know who the people are that like to have these open discussions, that like to brainstorm, but do think about, you know, how can we reimagine our business? How can we reimagine processes in our organization? And a lot of the time when you've said in the past, that's impossible, we can't do this, we can't put that process in place, we can't deliver that way. With AI, there's probably an answer to that. By using agents and elements of the Dynamics platform, there's probably new ways to do things that were perhaps not possible in the past. So do become visionary. Do think outside the box. Try to do it. You know there's people in your organization or friends of the organization that can help you do that. And try Encore. We're pretty visionary, and we like to give you, ways of suggestions on how to do things differently. So do try Encore. But do think bigger and greater. Think about the impossible. Write down some big goals and put them on the wall, and let them stew for a bit in your offices, either in person or virtually. Style of thinking will unlock the most incredible ideas for agents. And sort of building on that, and I won't spend too much time on this, but some of you'll know Simon Sinek's Golden Circle. Make sure your vision for the business or organization is watertight. Make sure that you understand what your mission is, and make sure you have a vision and mission. You can't just write something down and say it's a vision or a mission. It has to follow these rules. Your vision and mission must withstand technical, political, and environmental change. It must be inclusive in terms that everyone can understand and contribute. It must be service orientated, and by that we mean intangible, and the benefits go to those other than the leaders. So why you do your business or your organization is your vision. You answer that question, and with how and what is the mission for your organization. You follow these rules, see if it applies to your organization today. If it doesn't, fix it immediately, because until you get aligned understanding of the vision and mission of your organization, don't start wasting time on AI until you actually have that fully understood. Because with that, you will then be able to prioritize the service gains you want to give your customers and your stakeholders. Another thing I want to touch upon is value chain analysis. These are different parts of your organization, and you can research this in your own time, but I do want to share it with you. This is a very important way this is an excellent matrix for you to understand how you compete in your organization. So you can see logistics, operations, marketing, sales, services, procurement, technology, human resources, and firm infrastructure. If you're good at one of these things, or all of these things, these become competencies, something we're good at. If you can link two together, in other words, our operations with our sales are both excellent, and we compete well in the market, that becomes a core competency. Understand what your core competencies are. It's very good in terms of understanding how you're going to compete and how you understand what your unique value proposition to the market is. Please go research value chain analysis. If you're ever doing reviews of the organization, if you're ever looking at reviewing numbers and planning for the future, it's often good to take that information and do some value chain analysis. You might think that you compete well on service or people or technology, but you might actually, the numbers might dictate something differently. Value chain analysis is an excellent way to go back and look and see, how are we actually competing and winning? We thought this, but we're actually doing this. And you can align accordingly. And that can come back to your vision and mission. And then therefore, once your data is organized, you can actually think about, how do we take AI as a strategy and move forward? Technology companies amongst you might know the lean canvas. It's another good matrix where you can actually look at, how do we compete? I would draw attention to the unique value proposition right in the middle there. Ask yourself, what is your unique value proposition? And then double check, is it unique, or does somebody else already do it? Because if somebody else is doing it, it's not unique. So have a think about that part, and make sure that you've got solutions for the top 3 problems in the market that you solve. I won't dwell on this. This is the lean canvas. It is something that I absolutely recommend and that you spend time looking at. Okay, I will hand over to Aaron.
Thanks, Malcolm. Maybe one quick thing to add in terms of that readiness of your systems. Maybe it goes without saying, but readiness also includes effectively being cloud ready. So in order to unlock a lot of the AI capabilities, it's incredibly difficult if you're running systems on-prem. So maybe that's an obvious thing, but that is one very easy one, I think, that we can all kind of take action on in order to get our systems in a spot where we can take the most advantage out of Copilot and AI. So what I wanted to talk to you all about today was a little bit about the journey that Encore took in order to envision and incorporate AI into our own business. So I'm Aaron Cameron. I'm the chief revenue officer here. I also am leading our go-to-market initiative in and around AI. And what that ultimately means is I'm responsible for coming up with AI solutions both internally to improve our processes, as well as develop service offerings for the client base that we have and the prospect base that we have, as well as build agents that anyone can engage with, and then take those things ultimately to market and make them available to you. So the one thing that I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about today is sort of our own experience that we then translated into an offering for the general public that was very recently launched. If you've seen any of my webinars in the past, you probably would have seen this slide or heard a little bit about this story. Although today I'm going to go a little bit deeper than usual. So we started, and we really kind of struggled. Malcolm kind of talked about the visionary side of things. Our own struggles were really in terms of what should we build, and it took a long time to kind of figure out how we could find something that we could use AI to effectively automate for us. And so what we did was, instead of kind of trying to figure out what it is we exactly wanted, we started with let's take stock of what we have today, and where's our data, where's our information, and what can we do with it. And we also took we also changed some of our thinking away from what are we doing today that we can automate better and go faster with, and we changed that into what can't we do today that we would like to do but can't because it's either too onerous or the data is too disconnected, or it takes too much time. We're talking to too many people. And so what we did was we tapped into a system that we currently use called Gong. It's for our sales team, and basically this piece of software, which lives in the cloud. It's actually not a Microsoft piece of software. Records all of our conversations with our customers and our prospects. And so we have all of this unstructured data sitting in this Gong application that includes many different conversations over the course of time that we are engaging with our customers and our prospects on. And so we said, let's tap into that and see what we can kind of find. And on the other side, we also engaged in a sales methodology called Discover, Demo to Win, which largely says, take these conversations and that clients are having with you, understand what impact they are wanting out of implementing a new system like Dynamics, and then articulate that back and make sure we're aligning our presentations and our implementations back to the ultimate goals that the client is trying to achieve. You can imagine that's relatively difficult if you haven't been with every conversation with the client, and you have to remember all of the conversations that you've had with them over the course of time. And so what we did was, why don't we use AI to extract this data, organize it in that middle layer there, and then use AI to transform that into an impact statement for anyone that may be involved in the implementation of this project, or in developing a demonstration or a presentation to the client at the end of the day. And it worked great. We were able to kind of uncover some things that that the salesperson maybe didn't remember, or was translating into their own language rather than using customer language. So it really increased our ability to create those impact statements that we could then use in our pitches back to our customers. So this is how we kind of we got there, but then we dug a little bit further and we thought, well, this is only one source of information and data that we can tap into. Really, the whole story is living elsewhere within the systems that we have in place at Encore. So now can we just advance the animation for me a little bit? So we have Teams calls as well that aren't recorded in Gong. We have emails that are going back and forth between us and our customers and prospects. We have some chats sometimes that will engage with them as well as other documents that they may provide us as part of the evaluation of our systems. So we thought we'd try to gather up all of those company-owned information assets and organize them in one central repository for then our AI to ultimately take into account all of these other internally owned assets. You can advance one more, Malcolm. And then instead of just looking out to external sources for the initial take, which was overlaying our sales methodologies, we thought, well, we can also take into account information coming from the client's website or up-to-date industry news or any economic indicators that are occurring out there, either for their industry or in general. We can take into account LinkedIn data in order to understand the motivations of various people within that organization. Then instead of just creating those impact statements, we layered on top of that the ability for not just the rep, but the sales manager to effectively interrogate that data through Copilot chat, or effectively chatting with Copilot, the paid version, in order to ask questions about where we're at in a particular sales cycle, or in order to ask questions about what is important to which individual when starting to prepare for those presentations. So as we started asking questions, we found there's some other interesting ideas that we could incorporate into the output that AI had for us. So like any sales organization, we have a difficult time getting updated information in our pipeline. So I think it's the age-old issue of updating, the sales stage we're at. When are we going to close deals? Do we have all of the contacts in our CRM? What's the likelihood we're going to win a particular opportunity? Can you create or limit the amount of time we spend creating graphics for presentations that we're going to do, and other things like what does the forecast look like based on the data that we have in our pipeline. So those are all things that we do today, but because we're very, very dependent on manual labor in order to get them in, they're not always up to date. They're often, in parts incomplete, and they're often very different based on the subjectivity of the sales individual that is entering them. So using AI, what we're able to do is elevate our game and information around all of these, and it allows us to take very, very different approaches. I'll give you an example for forecasting that we could not have even dreamed of taking even in a manual capacity, because it just required too much time and effort in order to generate the forecast using some of the data that we ultimately had. So the takeaway that I wanted to kind of give you guys today was, in our experience, we didn't have a vision for everything on the right. Our biggest challenge was in just finding out what to build. So what we did instead was focused very, very narrowly on one thing, and that one thing unlocked an absolute massive waterfall of potential that we could then further iterate on. And we haven't achieved everything that you see on the right, but we are incrementally adding those to our Encore AI AI agent. I think we can go to the next slide. In addition to that, we took that experience and we packaged that up into an engagement that the general public can kind of come to us, and we would then guide them through based on our own experience. So that's another thing that kind of came out of that was, well, we can use these pieces of approach that we took in building out our own AI journey and extrapolate that and provide that down to our customers as well to help them unlock some of these ideas. This offering is very specifically for organizations that don't necessarily currently have a vision for what they can use AI for in a very concrete manner, and are looking to kind of unlock that potential in a way that is very, very unique and very, very specific to them, not in general terms. So keep that in mind. This is not for everybody. This is for those organizations that want that unlocking of vision. And we start in basic with just gathering some of those informational assets that you have. So where is your data stored? What are some of the key processes that you have in place? What departmental challenges are you having? Often we find a lot of benefit in and around, I think Malcolm talked a little bit earlier, interdepartmental processes. What external sources are you regularly going to in order to take information, or would you like to go to incorporate information into your processes? So that first taking stock or inventory of what you have and where it is sort of the first step. So we get a little bit of a lay of the land and how we can potentially organize that data, which is a big piece of what Malcolm talked about. The next step is a little bit more unrestricted thinking, or allowing some license for your individuals along with us that's a little bit guided to tap into some of that creativity, and we start that by asking questions, things like what do you wish you could do that you couldn't do today? What piece of information sits out there somewhere that would be really helpful to have in the processing of this particular piece of work? And I think when we think a little bit unrestricted in an unrestricted fashion, we unlock ideas that we just never would have thought about when we're thinking about everything within the processes of our own business. And then after we kind of gather up a lot of that, just ideas as well as base layer of inventory of systems, we then try to start stack ranking. Well, what's gonna get us the most bang for the buck in order to automate and prove out the value, but also that will kind of give us the most in terms of potential future value. And then what we do is we create the connection to your data source. We test that out by asking it a very, very some specific or guarded questions in and around what is this data going to result in for us, and then we come up with an output. So ideally, we're not just pulling information and chatting with it. We're pulling information, chatting with it, and then actually producing an output at some point, either into another system or an output like a graphic or something along those lines. So it's intended to kind of go through a very simple process, but again, unlock a lot of ideas. We would just automate one. We can go to the next slide there, Malcolm. That engagement is largely, we really tried to hone in on a few things when wanting to pitch that to customers. So we need it to be quick. So as it's a pilot, we want to be able to prove the value of AI and the processes that we're going through with you guys very quickly. We want that to be very focused on unique value that the customer can get versus generic value that we think we can extrapolate and apply to all customers. So this is a very unique experience at the end of the day to you. We need it to be fixed fee in our opinion. So we did not want to have a time materials engagement on that, and so that allows Encore to take a little bit of the risk on that front in order to prove out that value. It is also intended, and it has to be, if it's going to be customer specific, it's going to have to be a collaborative process. So there is some investment in time on the customer side in order to really, work with us to drive out that value. And ideally, not totally required, but ideally it has some element of dynamics at the end of the day, either in terms of the systems that we're pulling information from, or the system that we're ultimately writing to, based on information that from the systems that we pulled from. So that's largely the main goals that we're trying to achieve with the engagement that we have. And we can go to the next one, Malcolm. And largely what this ultimately looks like is a project that takes roughly 4 to 6 weeks in calendar time. That fixed fee investment is $10,000 plus any Microsoft licensing that you would require. And that is a little bit of a hard one for us to answer until we kind of get into what that engagement looks like and which pieces of software we would need to or you need to license in order to make it happen. Typically, it's going to be an individual seat, at least one of Copilot, possibly some Copilot Studio, maybe some Azure credits. It's typically not a lot in that area, but did want to kind of call out, you may have some licensing you need to purchase in order to make this happen. And usually it's about 30 to 45 hours of overall client effort. It's a lot more than that on the Encore side, and it does translate to a much the fixed fee translates to a much lower rate if you were to divide it by the number of hours that we intend to put into this. So it's our basically investment in the engagement with you guys in order to find potential. And then the next steps, or how do you engage with us on that? We have a letter of engagement that we would just simply provide that you would sign off on, and the way we ultimately go. I think we go to the next one there, Malcolm, and that might be the last one for me. I think it's back to you. Or it's back to anybody.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, I think the last thing I would share is, of course, this is a little bit outdated, but obviously the massive adoption. By last year, I believe 40% of IT spend was allocated to AI-related initiatives. So whether that's very superficial stuff, basic use of Copilot, but also into agents. So this is a big opportunity and a big exciting time. But I'll pass things back to Katie.
All right, amazing. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Malcolm. Just a reminder to everyone, if you do have questions, you can put them in the control panel, and I will get questions kicked off. I have one here. Okay, are there different ways to manage data across access for Copilot for different users?
So yes, so it inherently happens based on what they have access to within, assuming it's Microsoft software, so within your Microsoft security setup. So if I do not have access to Malcolm's documents in his OneDrive, it will not consider those when I ask Copilot that question, unless he shares it with me. If Malcolm does share that with me, or if I do have access to a system, it would take into account my level of access to the data in that system. Similarly, if I've got access to, say, CRM, but only the sales area of CRM, not the customer service area of CRM, it is only going to look at the areas of CE sales that I have access to. So to answer your question, in the Microsoft context, it's only the responses that I'm going to get may be different because it's only accessing what I have security access to. So hopefully that helps. Yeah.
That was great. Okay, and you're talking about connecting with Microsoft tools. Can Copilot connect with non-Microsoft solutions?
Yes, and in fact, when we started, we connected to exactly that. We connected to Gong, which is not a Microsoft tool, but we built that connection, and we can build and have built connections to a variety of different sources in order to extract that data. once we extract it and put it into a data store, we then have some work to do in and around making sure that the right people are accessing the right information. So in our case, we only extracted data that we felt that the group who had access to Copilot was allowed to see. So any data that they were not allowed to see, we did not obviously extract. So the answer is yes. You can not only can you access data that is not Microsoft, you can direct which large language models you use. You don't necessarily always have to use the Microsoft Copilot. So we can access multiple LLMs in order to generate responses. And in fact, best practices, I would say, when you go up into enterprise, is they deliberately architect their AI solutions to look at multiple large language models in order to offset potential, they call them hallucinations, but in order to validate the validity of what the responses are. So they're literally using competitive LLMs in order to make sure that the responses are in line with reality. So a lot of different flexibility within the Microsoft platform to direct where we look and what ultimate technologies we use in order to generate responses.
Amazing. We are getting close to time. Just a reminder to everyone that this session has been recorded, and then I will be sending it out to you next week. I do have one great question left that I would like to get to before we end off, but also another reminder, as Aaron was talking about the Copilot value prototype, I've added a link in the chat where you can check out our website to learn more about that offering. But the final question I have today is, we have staff that use all kind of AI tools, but we want to control this better. Who at the company should spearhead that?
I could not hear the question, Katie. I'm sorry. It was
who would spearhead perhaps controlling access to AI, and I think that's obviously if so, Aaron, if lots of people are using different forms of AI at work, I think one of the risks is, of course, that people are, using their personal login credentials for things like ChatGPT and putting company information in, and that's a huge risk. So I wouldn't do that. It does need to involve IT, but with quite a broad patience, understanding people. It's going to be quite hard to control what people do. And they need freedom to be able to put queries in there. So I think it's definitely you want to involve the leadership in your IT team in order to give access to the relevant AI tools for work-related activities. It's no different from it's no different a consideration where perhaps you're in a Microsoft environment. Everybody has a membership in Active Directory. Suddenly somebody uses a personal Gmail account to share a document, which you wouldn't want to do. I don't know if you'd want to add to that, Aaron.
No, I think you probably captured that pretty well, and I think we're out of time anyway.
All right, and with that, so I've also added a link to our events page in the chat if you'd like to check out previous webinars or register for upcoming sessions. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Aaron and Malcolm, for the information today. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.